What is up, everybody, and welcome to the Finger WAG podcast. I am your host, Gideon Hertz, and I am thrilled to be bringing you the second episode of the Finger WAG podcast. Today, we are going to dive in on the NBA draft and get you prepped for Wednesday night and Thursday night, where we hope to hear two Hoyas have their name called. Micah Peavy and Thomas Sorber will both be waiting to be drafted, and hopefully we will hear both of them called to the NBA. I'll be joined here by Jake Foote. You know him from the first episode. You know him from Twitter. You know him from his analysis across the board. He's going to join me to talk everything NBA draft, break down the prospects for Micah Peavy and Thomas Sorber, where they might go, how they project to the NBA. We'll give you a little bit of historical context as well and talk through everything that you need to prepare for the NBA draft. And without further ado, let's get to it. The Finger WAG podcast starts now. What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the Finger WAG podcast. I am joined here by Jake Foote again to talk NBA draft preview. What's up, Jake?
Not much, Gideon. Excited to be back.
Feels a little weird. We're in a weird spot where we've got two Hoyas ready to hear their names called in the NBA draft. That has not been the case in a very long time.
I know it feels very foreign to be able to celebrate our players for the first time in a decade or so.
Hopefully this is just the start of it in the NBA, and we'll see Thomas and Micah for a long time. And we're going to dive into each player's prospects in the NBA. We'll talk about strengths, weaknesses, where we think they might end up. We'll end with some bold predictions and some thoughts on where they actually will go on Wednesday and or Thursday. Why the NBA needs a 2-night draft is beyond me, but hey, they do what they do. So where we stand going into the draft right now, I'll give a little bit of context and then we'll dive into each player. We all know what's going on with Thomas Sorber. There were early rumblings, maybe he would withdraw, come back to Georgetown. Really, he was always too good to do that. The opportunity is too great, and we've started to hear him getting some lottery love. He's gotten the green room invite, one of 24 guys to be invited to the green room in New York for the draft. So we're fully expecting that he will be called on Wednesday, hopefully the early part of Wednesday night. Most boards and mocks have him going in the 10 to 15 range. I've seen him at 17 to Minnesota. The Spurs at 14. Sorber and Wembanyama. Sign me up for that. Awesome. Brooklyn at 19. Meh. The Hawks with 2 selections in the first round, 12 and 22. I've seen that. And lately, I think I saw today, either The Ringer or Sports Illustrated mocked him to OKC, the NBA champs, at 15. Peavy, little bit of a different story and a different question for him. We've seen him in the 45 to 50 range on most boards. Obviously, that's mid to late second round. He is in most mocks, so fully expect that he's going to hear his name called. I know, Jake, you predicted that he might jump into the first round, and the more I look at it, the more I think he should. We'll see if that happens.
I don't know about first round. I'm confident he's going to get picked. I don't see that 58 guys go before him. I'd be very surprised on the first round. Not that he's not one of the best 30 players in the draft today, but you know, he turns 24 in July, and last year there was only one guy of his age that was a first round pick, and that was Terrence Shannon, who scored 26 a game in college. So I think he's going to be close, probably in that 30 to 45 range. Probably first round might be pushing it.
Fair. And my apologies for misquoting you there. Appreciate you jumping in on that.
Good. You were good.
I think I am just, as I look at this draft board, I think he's a late first round, early second round type guy. I'm really high on him for the NBA, but I hear you. I think the age certainly bumps him down. We've seen him mocked to the Bucks at 47. I think that's ESPN. That's an interesting place that we can talk about for him. The Bulls at 45, Memphis at 56. So all in that range. Before we dive into these guys, though, I want to just take a note on sort of where these the Hoyas, where this all lands. And actually, I'm waffling here because I just saw a note that Kristaps Porzingis was just traded to the Hawks, so that may have a impact on where Thomas Sorber ends up going.
Yeah, I wouldn't be sure that the Hawks see Kristaps as a long-term guy. It depends on what they're going to do contract-wise with Okongwu. But yeah, I don't think they're going to try to jam Sorber into a room with Okongwu and Kristaps. So probably wouldn't bet on Atlanta taking a center.
Yeah. Live breaking on the Finger WAG pod, though. And I was not super excited about Thomas in Atlanta, though I think they're doing some interesting things. As not an organization that has a great track record, in my opinion. So I'm okay with him not ending up in that crowded big room. So just to give a little bit of historical context for where these two Hoyas sit. So the Hoyas have not had a draft pick in the NBA draft since 2013. Otto Porter going third. By the way, if you are interested in NBA draft history, looking back at that 13 draft is wild. That's the Anthony Bennett, Victor Oladipo draft, and then way down there at 15, there's a guy named Giannis Antetokounmpo who a lot of teams had a chance to take and did not. Otto went third in that draft to obviously the Washington Wizards. This will be the first time, hopefully, fingers crossed, knock on wood, all that good stuff. The first time two Hoyas will be drafted since 2008. Roy Hibbert going to Indiana and Patrick Ewing Jr. drafted in the second round. He was 47th overall, getting somewhere in there, to Sacramento. The last time before that was 1996. Iverson, Junkyard Dog, and Othello Harrington going in the 96 draft. So needless to say, this is an exciting time for the Hoyas to actually have two guys who we are fairly confident, again, fingers crossed, will be hearing their names called before the end of the draft.
Yeah, I think I touched on it in the first podcast, but even though there hasn't been a return to the NCAA tournament yet under the Cooley staff and administration, today or this week is a moment for celebration. This is what healthy programs do. They take recruits in, they take transfers in, and they get them to the NBA and give them a chance to play professionally. We should celebrate both the program and the kids. From all accounts, both Micah and Sorber are quite great kids. So good week to be a Georgetown fan.
Yeah, and if you haven't gotten a chance to look at the Micah Peavy post-workout interview, I think it was at Golden State, where he talks about Georgetown and his time at Georgetown glowingly, talks about the fan base, how much he loves Georgetown, loves Ed Cooley. It just underscores how much we should all be Micah Peavy fans. And I know we all are, but for being here for 1 year, he is a great ambassador for the program, and we really should get behind wherever he goes.
Agreed. Wholeheartedly.
All right, let's jump into a little bit of breakdown on each of these two guys, and we'll take a look at how they project into the NBA. We'll take them one at a time, starting with Thomas. What, Jake, do you see as sort of his main strengths that will translate into NBA ball?
I think there's a few. I think a negative of his may be that he's not super elite at anything. If there is something that you'd say he's elite at, it's his feel for the game at his age. There's not a lot of 19-year-old big men that understand defensive assignments and can pass and see the floor like he does, as well as kind of has enough control over his body to apply some of the things that he's seeing. Now, feel for the game only gets you so far once you get to the NBA, and there's a huge uptick in speed and in size and in athleticism of the guys around you, but he's certainly starting in a better position than most 19-year-old big men with regards to with his feel for the game. I'd also say a second strength of his, which if you asked me 3 months ago, I would have thought that it might have been a weakness, is his measurables. I really thought he was going to measure probably 6'8.5" with a 7'2" wingspan, which is something more along the lines of the aforementioned Okongwu from the Hawks or like an Al Horford. But he really put up remarkable measurements at the combine. Measured 6'9", a little over 6'9", barefoot with a wingspan of 7'6". And to give some context to that, those are the same measurements that Anthony Davis had when he came out. In fact, Sorber's wingspan's a little wider. Davis's wingspan measured 7'5.5". So to put it into NBA terms or to compare him to NBA players, his measurables are very comparable to Anthony Davis, to Jared Allen. He's a tick smaller than Andre Drummond and DeAndre Jordan, a tick bigger than Rob Williams. So from all indications with how he measured, he's going to have the size and the frame to play the center position at the NBA level, which is a strength because sometimes with these 19-year-old kids, that's a massive question mark. And I would have said it was a question mark 3 months ago, but he seems to be in a good position there. Also, with the flexibility to either lose weight and develop some more lateral quickness, or to even gain weight, gain muscle, and become more of an interior force, depending on what's going to be asked of them at the next level.
Yeah, so I'm interested in the weight question because I, like you, I thought he would measure well but not outstanding, and the 7'6" wingspan is crazy. You mentioned guys like Anthony Davis, Jared Allen, even a Jaren Jackson Jr. who are similar, and those are guys who can play at the five, but oftentimes look best in a two big lineup. And a lot of that has to do with how they play off ball and weak side defense. But it also comes down to, having the body to get into it with some of those bigger, heavier centers. So which way do you think Thomas ends up going, and which way do you think is best? Putting on a little bit of weight to deal with those bigger guys, or taking it off and maybe boosting his athleticism a bit?
So I think he is going to end up being able to do both. He weighed 263 at the combine, which is probably 10 pounds heavier than what he played at when he was at Georgetown. He said as such in an interview this morning. So let's say he's 255 and either going to try to gain foot speed or gain muscle mass. Watching him play last year, I really felt like there was still some size and muscle to put on in terms of physicality. He did struggle a little bit with some of the bigger centers in the league. Terrace Reed, Zubi Ejiofor felt notably bigger than him and stronger than him. So I think he's going to be able to add muscle. Now he also needs to do that while also adding athleticism to the current frame he has, because I think he's in a decent position for a 19-year-old that was billed as this unathletic kid that was this below the rim finisher. He's able to move his feet pretty well at the moment. It does need to improve for him to actually be able to guard guards on switches in the NBA. But I think that there's a case to be made that he can add 10 pounds of muscle mass while also adding some athleticism to his frame. That's ideally what occurs. If he were to go one way or the other, I'd probably say the foot speed is going to be more important for him than the strength, because he's already quite strong.
Yeah, I think I'm with you there. I also think adding a little bit of lower body strength can help him. I think part of what I saw a lot against those bigger guys was just he would get pushed off the spot early, which I think comes down to not necessarily just sheer size, but having that lower body strength to really back in and battle guys. And like you said, the 7'6" wingspan gives him a lot of options at the next level. So talk to me about his offensive skill set that he's going to be bringing to the NBA. One of the biggest things, obviously, that, NBA teams are looking for is shooting. Do you think he can develop that at the next level?
I think if you asked any scout, they'd say the offense is behind the defense for him at the moment. Offensively, I'd say the positive in him is that he can pass the ball for a big. He had an assist rate around 16%. Georgetown and Cooley ran a lot through him, some in the high post, some in the low post. In non-conference play, when he probably was catching the ball at the top of the key a little bit more, he was quite good at finding a skip pass and assessing all options on the court. I wouldn't classify him as like an elite hub that any NBA team's going to run their offense through, but he's going to be dangerous in the short roll and as a roller just because of his ability to catch and make a decision in a coordinated fashion. And that also ties hand in hand with his hands, his catch radius. I talked to a lot of Georgetown friends, and throughout the year, people were quite amazed with some of the catches he made. You throw it up in traffic, he's got these long arms, these great hands, and he has an ability to catch the ball in traffic and not just bring it right down, but make an immediate decision, which is going to help him as connective tissue in the NBA. Now, what you mentioned prior about his shooting, it's not so important that it's going to make or break him as an offensive player because he's going to be able to do some other things as a passer, as a screener, as a low post player. But that is really the way for him to take the next step. At Georgetown, I wouldn't say he shot it well. He shot less than 20% from three. It was about 10% in Big East play. I think it was pretty bad from the mid-range as well. If you watch film on him, it takes a while to get into a jump shot. The base is pretty inconsistent. And most of these shots are wide open. People were daring him to shoot the three. So all of that slightly discouraging. But the encouraging part is that he was a pretty good free throw shooter. Shot about 72%. He was a lot better in non-conference than in Big East play, but that may have been just as a result of how much Georgetown was asking him to do and how worn down he was starting to get. And he was a very good free throw shooter in high school. I think his senior year was just shy of 80%. So typically when predicting a shooter, you can use the free throw percentages to have an idea of their potential, especially if you put them in a system where they're going to be taking more efficient shots. So I don't lose all hope for him. I think eventually, if he can be like a Thomas Bryant level shooter, he's going to stick in the NBA for a long, long time just because he won't be a liability on that end. But the variance in outcomes in his shooting is so wide, I couldn't tell you one way or the other how that's going to look in 5 years from now.
One of the things that surprised me the most about him, and maybe it shouldn't have, but just getting to see him in person and over the course of all the games that he played, was his touch around the rim and his ability to finish, oftentimes through contact, make some tough catches and some tough finishes. Do you think that is something that NBA teams look at and say he projects to have that ability at the next level? Or do you think they look at it and say, looked great against lesser, smaller competition, we need to focus solely on developing his shot?
No, I think he's going to grade out quite well in terms of touch and in terms of finishing. The NBA has gotten very interested in people's finishing rate at the rim. It's typically a good translator of who can take a step, who can move up to the next level and still play efficiently. They get more scared about it with guards than they do with big men. But Sorber put up some pretty great numbers as a finisher and around the rim without even dunking the ball a lot. He made 65% of his layups. He made 69% around the hoop in half-court possessions. And he did all this, again, not being a lob threat, not being an alley-oop guy. He did have a few dunks, but he takes a lot of time to load into his dunks. So he's not going to be a guy that's jamming the ball home at the next level. But I think he has the ability to put the ball in the hoop. I think where you get concerned is that he was quite dominant in non-conference play and less dominant against guys his size. In non-conference play, he shot around 60% from the field. In conference play, it was closer to 50%, a tick under. And most concerningly, we played 4 games against the premier centers in the Big East. That's Ryan Kalkbrenner, Zubi Ejiofor, and Terrace Reed. In those 4 games, Sorber didn't really have anything going offensively. He averaged less than 8 points. He never scored 10 in a game. He shot 12 of 36 from the field at a clip of 33%, with 12 turnovers over those 4 games. And he shot 6 of 11 from the line, which meant he wasn't getting to the line. And when he did, he was worn down. He was missing them. And that goes hand in hand with the body. I think as he becomes a more physical, coordinated, mature player, he's going to be able to play through contact against guys his own size, but he has all the coordination and all the touch to take that step as he grows and develops. So I would say that the NBA is probably more optimistic about that than pessimistic, although there will be some reservations that he's not a lob threat, that he's not going to play in a 2-man pick and roll and dunk the ball.
I think that's a good and fair breakdown of sort of some of his weaknesses or potential hiccups. But I agree. I think given his age, given his size, given the way that he projects to read the game, all of that, I think more teams are optimistic than pessimistic, and that's why you're seeing him in that 10 to 15 range. We'd be remiss if we didn't touch a little bit more, just ending sort of his analysis section on his defense, because he was everything you'd want and more on the defensive end. Tell me a little bit about how you think that will translate to the NBA.
Well, I don't think the NBA is looking at him and saying he's an elite rim protector, because he doesn't have that, jump out of the gym, long arms, Clint Capella, Dwight Howard type thing going on. But what he does have is just an impeccable feel for the game, an ability to play vertical and use his size to his strengths without fouling. He's not a freak athlete on that side of the floor, but he's just always in the right place. At Georgetown, he had an 8% block rate while only fouling 3 times per 40 minutes, which is just crazy, because
Crazy.
you look at these college centers and you're hoping you get 25 minutes out of them because they're going to foul. And by the time he got hurt, Cooley was playing him the whole game. He was playing almost 40 minutes a game. He played 40 in that Providence loss, and they weren't even thinking about taking him out. But he wasn't putting them in a position where they needed to deal with this foul trouble. In non-conference play, it happened a few times, and then some of which was referee luck. We could argue about the West Virginia game, but he did a really good job of not putting himself in compromising positions, and I think that's a skill that will translate. He's just always going to be in the right place, which is something you can't teach. And I'm sure that the coaches and the front office guys that are watching his tape you'd be so relieved to have a guy in the room like that already has a mature feel on the defensive end. Now, where you get nervous about him is the lateral quickness. It's just switching on to a guard in the Big East is not like switching on to a guard in the NBA. So at first, he's probably just going to be a drop defender. But I think there is some potential there. Again, he has great instincts. He doesn't foul. There was a couple times this year where, when we were worried about him being in foul trouble, like say the Syracuse game, they played him and Fielder together, where Fielder guarded more of the 5 and Sorber was asked to just roam and guard a 4. He did it against Donnie Freeman at Syracuse, and Freeman didn't do anything. In fact, Freeman drove into him like 3 times and he just blocked his shot like it was nothing. So I think there's potential on that end just to be an average switch defender. And if he becomes a guy that can switch 1 through 5 adequately while providing above average rim protection and being a net positive on offense, even if the 5th option, then he's a guy that's going to play 12 to 15 years in the league.
Yeah, one of the striking sort of memories I have of him last year was got a chance to sit basically courtside at the Seton Hall game. Not a humble brag. There were not that many people in that arena that day, so I got up close, and seeing and hearing him navigate around, sort of direct the defense on pick and roll situations, was really, really interesting. He was very much in control, calling out ices, calling out switches, was really vocal, which I think is actually a really big part of just being able to be an effective pick and roll big. And I think that's part of what, if he can do that at the next level, I think that's helpful. And again, as you say, just his positioning and reading the game puts him a step above to be able to identify, maybe not right away. It takes rookies and young guys a while to get into the flow of the NBA speed and offense, but he should have the ability to pick out the right coverages and make the right reads that are necessary from a big.
Yeah, and to build on that, I sat second or third row at the Seton Hall road game at the Prudential Center, and it was the same thing. The whole defense, what Georgetown did was they just funneled guys to drive the ball against Sorber, and they just dared you to do it. And he let guys get all the way to the rim, and then he just put up a wall, and most college guards, I should say, couldn't do anything about it. And the data point that we do have that, we saw it as fans, I promise you the NBA saw it. He was the defense. Georgetown, when he was off the floor, gift wrapped 2-point baskets. I said it the other day, but with Sorber off the floor, opponents shot 59% from 2-point range and 63% at the rim, which is both pretty horrible numbers comparable to what our defense looked like when Supreme Cook was there 2 years prior. When Sorber was on the floor, opponents shot 42% from the 2-point range, 49%, even less than that, 48.3% at the rim, which both would be the equivalent of a top 5 defense in the country. So Sorber took a defense that was bottom half in the NCAA, potentially even worse when he wasn't on the floor, and made them like Houston, just on his own. The NBA sees that. The NBA knows that it wasn't these contributing factors on defense that made a 19-year-old kid look better than he was. He was a kid that stepped in and can command a back line by himself, which is the biggest compliment you can give a 19-year-old defender.
So let's play a little game here of ceiling versus floor. This is a game that I completely just made up. Let's think about what he projects at his ceiling and where we think his floor is. And you can take this in any direction you want, whether you want to call out comps that you think are on each side of this, or just kind of stats or general sort of player, what he ends up being. But what do you think he is at his ceiling and his floor?
Okay, I'll start with the floor. I think when he measured and you saw that he was 6'9", 7'6" wingspan, I immediately thought that Thomas Bryant has now become the floor. And he was a guy that I thought he played similar to when he was in high school and coming into the NBA. Now, Bryant maybe has a little bit of a better jump shot than him at this age, but wasn't nearly the defender that Sorber was when he was 19. So I'd be annoyed and upset if his career took the path of Thomas Bryant and that he was just a second or third center for 10 years. That being said, a guy that plays 10 years in the league and is playing on his 30th birthday that's an exceptional basketball career. And in reality, we should be happy. Now, I think his 50th percentile is probably something more along the lines, I shouldn't even say 50th. This is probably more like 75th percentile, more along the lines of like a Wendell Carter Jr. or an Onyeka Okongwu, who we talked about. Just a guy that, potentially a starter, probably in a big rotation on a really good team that provides an adequate floor defensively, can give you 10, 12 points a game offensively, but there might be just one thing short, whether that's the athleticism doesn't totally get there or the jump shot doesn't totally get there. And again, those are guys that are going to make $200 million playing basketball, and it's an adequate career. I think the 100th percentile on him is something like an Al Horford, a little different profiles than Al. He's bigger than Al. Al's a much better athlete laterally. Al's not going to dunk the ball like Sorber doesn't, but Horford's been able to guard guards and point guards for the last 10 years of his career in his 30s, which I think you'd be real lucky if Sorber was ever able to do that. But more so the career, a guy that's a starter on a playoff team for 15 years, fringe all-star if everything goes right offensively. And, I'm not predicting this to happen. This is the 99th, 100 percentile, but
Totally.
He has some traits comparable to Horford, the maturity, the leadership, the positional awareness, the ability to pass as a center, that if everything does come together, that's a guy that winning teams look for decades on end.
I agree with all of those. I think one sort of sneaky possibility guy, he just kind of reminds me of the way he moves a little bit. Not the athlete that this guy is, but has some elements of his game is Bam Adebayo. Obviously another great player. I don't know where that falls in the ceiling versus floor calculus, but just one that comes to mind.
I think that'd be in the 100% of the ceiling. But
Fair enough.
On Adebayo is a great athlete, and Adebayo can put the ball on the floor, made enormous strides as a mid-range jump shooter, can give you 25 a game in the NBA, which I love Sorber, but I don't think he's ever going to be doing that or have the athleticism to do it. But, they're similar in size. Stranger things have happened.
Sure. All right, let's jump to Micah Peavy, and we'll come back and do our sort of predictions for where these guys go at the end. Obviously, as we talked about, a lot more questions about Micah Peavy in terms of when he'll go, where he'll go, will he go, all of that stuff. I think you and I are both pretty confident that he will get drafted, most likely at some point on Thursday. As NBA teams are looking at him, a 24-year-old coming off a truly remarkable season at Georgetown, what do you think they are looking at and saying, these are the strengths that he has that are going to translate to the next level?
I think there's numerous. I think at the age, the negative is the age, and we can talk about it over and over again. But he's a kid that when you put him on a college basketball floor, he looked like a professional, a man playing against boys. We'll see how much this translates, but this past year he was bigger, he was stronger, he was faster, he was more experienced. He didn't get sped up. He got where he wanted on the floor. When he played inferior players, he just took the ball from them. These are all qualities of if you dropped an NBA guy in a college game, that's how they should behave and how they should play. So in many aspects, he's kind of a plug and play guy, that there's not a lot in his skill set that the NBA is like, well, if this hits, we've got a player. He's pretty much already a player. And then if this hits, we've got a starter. The question is, how often do things click one way or the other for a guy that's already 24 years? But if we were to talk about specific traits, it's obviously the defense first and foremost. Cooley ranted and raved and said he was the best defensive player he's ever had, which means a lot coming from a guy that coached Chris Dunn. His steal rates are extremely high, pretty much the best of any sort of guard wing prospect in the draft. Of everybody invited to the combine, he had the most steals per game by quite a bit of a margin. And he did all that while playing every minute of every game and without fouling, which makes him a bit of an Iron Man, which I think, it's not the reason you draft somebody, but if you're looking for red flags to not draft somebody, the health, the ability to play long schedules, play deep into the year, it wouldn't be anything I'd be worried about with Micah. He's got the body to do it.
On the perimeter defense, and particularly the screen navigation pick and roll defense, I've seen some analysis saying he was not as good as a pick and roll defender as he appeared. Now, I think that's wrong. And I think that's a feature of sort of cherry picking some clips where he is doing a lot on the floor, which was, to me, the main tenet of his sort of defensive acumen, is just how much he did on the defensive end, really directing other guys defensively, setting up coverages, all of that stuff. Tell me a little bit about how you think he projects to as an on-ball pick and roll defender at the next level.
I would agree with you that I think any criticism on how he defended at the college game is kind of ridiculous. If you watch closely to how we defended, when he was off ball, he would just constantly switch to try to get himself back in a position where he was guarding the offensive threat. And he did it while basically guarding two or three people at once at times. Then when he got on ball, there were certain things he had to do. More often than not, he was going for a steal and trying to turn defense into offense. And Sam Vecini wrote in his draft preview that he didn't have a stat for it, but watching tape of everybody in the draft, he thinks that Micah led the country in steals that led to 2 points on the other end, which, judging from watching the games, I'd believe it. I think he's a little limited athletically. He's not this north-south and vertical athlete like some of these guys are. He's got short arms. He measured 6'6" barefoot, but only a 6'7" wingspan. But Athletically, he is very good laterally, and he plays defense with anticipation,
Yeah.
which I don't think all these guys do. He beats guards to the spot, and especially when he guards forwards. Forwards don't have a chance to beat him off the dribble.
Yeah.
Guards maybe, but even the guards that did any damage on him were trying to get to like a left-hand step back. I think the guy he had the hardest time with last year was Small from West Virginia, but he just killed him with mid-range jump shots. There was nobody that backed the ball out and said, "I'm going to beat Micah Peavy off the dribble." Um, he's going to be guarding ball screens in the NBA, so it's not going to be just guys just running at him. He has all the physical, he has the strength, the lateral speed, the smarts to navigate it. I wouldn't be concerned about that. I'd actually think he's way ahead of the curve on that compared to the average draft prospect.
I agree. And I think one of the things that was remarkable about his defense last year is how much he was able to dictate to the offensive player and funnel him to where Micah wanted him to go. As you said, beating guys to the spot. I saw, again, another sort of potential critique of his that he closes out a little erratically. I actually think that's a misreading of sort of what he was doing on closeouts. He would close out really hard, knowing that he had the quickness to get back and challenge at the rim, which is not something that most guys in college can do. And I don't know that he'll be able to do that at the NBA level because of the speed and quickness, but I'm also not sure that he's going to try. I think he knew what he was doing in those situations, and just being able to sort of anticipate and beat guys to the spot, as you said, allowed him to do a lot of things that most college defenders can't do. And I think in the short time that I don't know if you saw the NBA combine scrimmages. I watched a couple of those. He was doing the same things. He was able to dictate where guys were going on the floor from a defensive standpoint. And that's elite defensive ability.
Yeah, Georgetown put them on the ball as much as they could because that was their point of attack defensively. But I think he also navigated off the ball defense at a quite high level. He can follow shooters and navigate screens off the ball. He was more often than not in the right position defensively. His rebounding numbers in his career were never great, but I think that's honestly a good thing that he wasn't hunting stats and hunting weak side rebounds. He was always attached to his man on the perimeter. I have no concerns about how he's going to handle guarding at the next level. And if there are guys in the league that are going to kill him, it's just going to be because they're the best scorers on planet Earth and they'd kill everybody.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about where the questions really are. Again, we've mentioned the age, but it all comes down to offense. It all comes down to shooting. How do you view his offensive upside and the ability that he's going to bring on the offensive end to the NBA?
Well, he's going to learn how to catch and shoot, and he did it pretty well this year, but it's got to be something that is a no doubt positive in his game. He's got to be a guy shooting 35+% from three. He's got to be a guy that opponents can't just funnel the ball to and the possession ends. I have my notes here in which I list a strength, shooting with a question mark, and a weakness, shooting with a question mark. As to the strength, this year he shot 43% in Big East play from three on more than 4 attempts per game, which was the most in his career. He shot better than 43% on mid-range shots off the dribble, which is typically a tell on whether guys can shoot or not. And he did it at a really high rate, albeit almost all those were going to his right. He never really liked shooting to his left. He was the second best qualified shooter from three in the Big East, only behind Solomon Ball. And I think if you wanted to convince yourself that he was going to be a good shooter at the NBA level, this is the stat. His 3-point percentage, his 3-point makes, his 3-point attempts, and his true shooting percentage all went up in all 5 of his college seasons.
Yeah.
So he got better every single year, and he got better with better usage. And, God knows he wasn't taking the best shots sometimes when Georgetown was just asking him to do everything on their own. And he showed an ability and a confidence to do it. Now, if you want to talk about him as a negative shooter, He finished his career as a 61% free throw shooter, which is usually, like we were saying with Sorber, the telltale sign of whether shooting is going to translate at the highest level.
Yeah.
Now it improved from when he started, where he was like a 45% shooter as a freshman, and he shot 66% for Georgetown. But even then, there were so many times he got fouled and he missed the first one, and you were just like, God damn, Micah.
Yeah, a lot of one-on-ones.
He probably shot 80% on the second one, but
Yeah.
he wasn't good on the first one. And again, it's typically the defining telltale sign of whether the shooting will translate when the game speeds up, when there's less space, when it's more catch and shoot. And he didn't do it at a great level. So if I was a GM, I'd be very nervous on whether the shot sticks. And it has to. That's the other thing I'd say, because he got anywhere he wanted on a college court because he was bigger, stronger, coordinated, but he doesn't have that difference-making athleticism on the NBA court. He can dribble it as a wing, but he really doesn't have the best handle, and he's a straight-line driver. Most of the stuff he did in college was just beat a guy to his strong hand and walk him down to the block. So I don't think he's a guy that's going to, make a dribble move into a mid-range jump shot a lot at the professional level. He's probably not going to be a guy that's navigating ball screens and trying to score at 3 levels. He's going to be a guy that guards your best perimeter player for 12 to 24 minutes a game, depending on how much he can survive out there. And he's just going to be connective tissue on offense that you hope can score in transition, make the correct pass, hit a corner 3. And we'll see if he can do it or not.
Yeah. I think he can make the correct pass. I think you're right that it all comes down to catch and shoot for him. So let's play ceiling versus floor again. Where do you think he projects at his floor and his ceiling?
All right. Well, I wanted to talk about his measurables here because he's unique. He's 6 feet. He's 6'6" tall, but he has a 6'7" wingspan, and there just aren't a lot of guys in the NBA that are at a +1 or +2 wingspan and making a lot of money. In fact, I've looked it up, everybody's draft combine numbers, and of players that measure between 6'5" and 6'7" without shoes that had a wingspan of less than 6'8", there's less than 15 guys in the whole league right now. Now, there's some good, there's some bad. Most of all of them established a role in the league, either by being a really good defender or a really good shooter. Now, his pathway forward is probably just being the really good defender. A floor for him, that's tough to say because the floor for him is probably a guy that's not in the NBA.
Right.
To be honest, it's a guy that doesn't stick. Probably has an amazing career in Spain.
Yeah.
The absolute ceiling for him, I looked at my list, and Jimmy Butler is the guy with the wingspan of the 15 guys that had any sort of like real serious career as a scorer, but I'm not even considering that Micah might have a career like Jimmy Butler.
I am. I'm all in.
Oh
Micah Peavy next Jimmy Butler. Let's go.
What I hope for is, 90th percentile is Dylan Brooks, a guy that starts on a playoff team because he ended up figuring out a way to shoot 39% from 3 and guarded and was a pest for 10 years, 15 years. I think if you look a step below that in like a 75th percentile, and it remains to be seen what this kid is because he was just a rookie this year, but I think Jalen Wells has to be the best thing that ever happened to Micah Peavy right now, because Wells last year was a 2nd-round pick with the same measurements, was a little younger, but shot it pretty well in college, but didn't even have this reputation as a great defender. And he took the same traits that Micah has, where he was just a high energy, shows up every night defender, and shot it well enough. He shot 35% from 3 as a rookie. And I think he already, provided he comes back from the kind of gruesome injury he had at the end of the year, already cemented himself as a guy that's going to play 10 years in the league.
Yeah. He was an exciting one at the end of the year before he got injured for Memphis, for sure. I think that's a good comp.
So that's kind of what I'm hoping of Micah. He gets in a situation where a team is really just, maybe an injury occurs and they need him to play 20 hard minutes of defense, and he just plays hard enough and well enough that you can't ever take him off the floor, or at least eliminate his role.
Yeah, other guys that you've got on your list here that he measures similarly to that I think are just interesting. A former teammate, Kenrich Williams, interesting one there. Christian
Williams
Braun for sure.
Williams is a better shooter. Braun's a better athlete and better shooter. He's a better defender than Williams, but Anthony Black's on my list, who's
Yeah,
his kind of de facto stepbrother with David Peavy's relationship to the Black boys. Black is so much younger, 3-4 years younger, but honestly, this a very similar skill set.
yeah.
Black's going to play 10, 15 years in the NBA without ever making jump shots because he can pass the ball a little bit, and not only can he guard guards, but he can guard 6'9" initiators and just make it hell for them.
Yep.
He was quite good against Tatum in the Orlando Boston series. But the hope on Anthony Black is that he grows into a guy that can run the offense and shoot 35% from three, and he's got time to do it. I think on the low end, I mentioned it the other day, and he's a much smaller kid. I think he's only 6'3", but Jaden Springer,
Hmm.
just end of the bench, defensive guy. You're probably everyone that believed in Jaden Springer is still begging for him to start making jump shots. Again, he's a guy that's never going to get cut because over the course of 82 games, when you just need a kid to go play 15, 20 minutes on a given night, he can survive out there because he's so good defensively.
I think that those are all really good names. I think, the thing you mentioned is all of these guys are either top end defenders or top end shooters. There's other guys on this like Max Strus, top end shooter, Kevin Herter, top end shooter. Peavy's never going to be that, but can he make enough to stay in the league? And I frankly think he can. Count me as one of the guys who is optimistic on what he was able to do last year. The free throw shooting is really worrisome. I don't know what that's about. It didn't look like a stroke thing to me, but I have no idea. I think he can do it, and
Yeah,
I hope he can.
I'm a believer too. And I don't think it's ever this guy's starting 10 years on a playoff team, but I think it's a guy that's just going to survive enough in the league to, hopefully get a second contract as a depth piece and makes a living as an NBA player.
Yeah. All right. Well,
I believe in it.
I'm with you. Let's close out here and do first where we predict both Sorber and Peavy are going to go, which is largely arbitrary, but we're going to do it anyways. We're going to mock draft these guys. And then I want to get your bold prediction for each guy, assuming they get drafted, assuming, no injuries. What's the bold prediction for their rookie years? So let's start with draft positions. Where do you think Thomas Sorber is going to go on Wednesday?
All right. So I have the list of teams up in front of me, and I think somewhere 10 to 19 makes sense. Phoenix just traded in at 10, could use a center. There's rumors that Queen might be the guy there. Chicago at 12, San Antonio 14, OKC 15, Minnesota 17, Brooklyn 19. I think it's going to be Oklahoma City.
Wow.
I know they like him. I know that he was there for interviews. What Oklahoma City has the luxury of is every single person on their team right now is under contract next year.
Yeah.
So whatever they're drafting, and this might be unfortunate if you've got stock in Thomas Sorber, Rookie of the Year, but whatever they're drafting is probably just they're gonna stick in the G League for a year. And what they're gonna be looking for is a guy that can take a role in an area in which they're not going to pay one of these guys. And I think the very obvious person that OKC is not going to pay is Hartenstein.
Yep.
Eventually, they still got one more year of cap filler on him, and his salary kind of aligns with when they're going to give Chet and J-Dub their extensions. And when they do, Hartenstein walks. They'll have the other Jalen Williams as a center. Maybe Chet has put on enough weight as a center, but they're going to need another big man on short money to fill out that rotation and be a guy that can play in a playoff series, because over the next 5-10 years, they're going to be at the end of it every single time. So I think he's a perfect fit there, where they can just kind of draft him, get him healthy. He's not going to play summer league, kind of let him develop for a year, And then when his body's right, when his athleticism's right, then he assumes a role on a really good team, which is kind of what he's made to do. He's not made to be some floundering center on a bad basketball team. His intangibles are going to carry him.
Yeah. As a Nuggets fan, I hate to hear that. I do not want to have to watch and root for OKC, and I will not do it, though I will root for Thomas Sorber. I will say if he goes to OKC, they have a incredible track record of developing guys and developing young talent. So good news for him there.
I think whoever OKC drafts at this point, you should trust their scouting department that like they stole somebody. So if OKC were to draft Sorber, I'd feel really good about what the rest of his career is going to look like just by their token of support. In addition to OKC, I'm looking through this list now again. Minnesota makes a little bit of sense because
I don't think he gets past Minnesota.
I don't think he does either.
I think with their big situation, he makes a lot of sense in Minnesota.
Yeah, because Reed's going to be a goner, or they're going to move Gobert and invest in Reed, but they're going to need another big man in the room. San Antonio makes sense because long term, they can't play Wembanyama at the 5, and they've honestly played centers alongside Wembanyama thus far that are very similar to Sorber. Charles Bassey's a very similar profile, and Sorber would complement Wembanyama quite a bit. And then Brooklyn, you have to consider Brooklyn because Brooklyn just added the 22nd pick in that Porzingis draft. So Brooklyn has 19, 22, 26, and 27,
Yeah.
which means they can move up. So if Brooklyn decides that they like a kid at 13 or like a kid at 11, they can go get him. So who knows if Brooklyn likes him to that extent, but they're definitely players, somebody that I'd consider dangerous or potentially interested.
I think the boom scenario, and I put this in my 5 questions post on thefingerwag.com that everybody should go check out if you haven't. The crazy scenario is Peavy and Sorber going to Brooklyn at one of their 4 or 5 picks on day one, and we all become Brooklyn Nets fans. Get ready.
Brooklyn's got 36 too.
All right, so let's do Peavy. Where do you think he actually goes?
I said at the beginning of the podcast, somewhere between 31 and 45. Milwaukee's there at 47 and makes a ton of sense given that they're going to lose a bunch of free agents and that they're just going to need bodies that aren't on free agent deals. And Milwaukee's liked his profile. Milwaukee really likes Andre Jackson, and it's the same thing, a defender that, if the jump shot sticks, he sticks. Yeah, I'm looking around. It's hard to tell with these second round guys because it's not like nobody's drafting a second round player to join their rotation or somebody that they actually have real meaningful investment in. It's just it's typically just a kid that they believe in. So that's obviously case by case. And I just hope it's on a team. I honestly hope it's on a winning team or a mostly successful team that is going to run into some salary cap hell in the next few years and just needs guys on short deals.
Yeah.
Because that's his best avenue to playing.
That's why I think it is probably Bucks makes the most sense. I've seen him right around the range of Janai Broom. Who would you take given those two?
I'd take Peavy over Broom.
Yeah.
And Broom is such a good college basketball player, but there's no room for that in the NBA.
There's no room.
6'9" center that can't jump over a piece of paper. And
I don't think he can.
He was such a good college basketball player. But if Luka Garza is a bench big, then John Broom's probably not in the league.
Yeah. Well, the only reason I mention it is because I've seen a bunch of mocks with Broom going ahead of Peavy, and given their ages, given their skill sets, all that makes absolutely no sense to me. And I'm glad you agree. Let's close out with.
I got a couple few more things on Peavy.
Okay, go ahead.
In regards to last year's draft and what it might mean for him.
Yeah.
He's 23 years old in 9 or 11 months. He turns 24 next month. Last year, there were 9 players of the 58 drafted that were older than 23 on draft night, which I think bodes well for Peavy. That, especially in the second round, these teams don't really care about your age. 3 guys last year were drafted that were older than him. The oldest was Cam Spencer, who was 24 years old. But some of these guys that were older than him kind of had good seasons. Spencer was relatively solid, and he's going to
Yeah.
stick. I think Antonio Reeves might have been older than him, and he was all right.
Yeah, not bad.
And then in this year's draft, there are guys that are older than him. He's not the oldest. John Tonji and Eric Dixon and Bryce Williams are older than him. Williams probably doesn't get picked, but Tonji definitely does. Dixon's a 50-50.
I'm a big
And
Tanjay guy.
yeah, he can put the ball in the hoop. And then the second round again is littered with 23-year-olds. Nick Clifford, Cam Jones, Kalkbrenner, probably first round guys. But then the other older guys in the draft, Mark Sears, Chaz Lanier, Elijah Martin, Amari Williams, plus a litany of 22-year-olds that were 3 or 4 year players in college. I think he's as advanced right now in a physical profile. You know, only drop what they did in college to contribute right away, which I think gives him a leg up. So judging on how teams drafted last year, I'm not super concerned about the age. It's not expecting to be a first round pick, but somebody's going to think he can help them.
And I think this CBA has altered and shifted the way teams have to think about the draft. And more so than ever, we've seen this. They have to think about who are guys who can come in and contribute right away, particularly if you're a team like the Bucks, who is trying to figure out how do we still contend. You don't have time to wait for a 18, 19-year-old. You need a guy who is going to jump in and perform. And I think I would always bet on defense. You know, I think a lot of these teams can, and particularly with a guy like Peavy who can make the right play on offense, if not make the shot, which hopefully he can make the shot, but he can make the right play on offense. I think you've got to take a look at that if you're a team that needs help right now.
I agree.
Let's do a fun one just to close out. Assuming both guys get drafted, both guys are healthy, both guys are on NBA rosters starting next year. What are your bold predictions for these guys?
Well, I've kind of said my bold prediction for Micah, if he ends up in a situation that's good for him, is that he's going to play his way into a rotation and hopefully into the plans of a team long term. If he lands on a team like the Bucks that's going to have some minutes for him, he's got a good shot. Ask me in 48 hours if he's drafted to a team that's got 15 guys already under contract and he's going to play in the G League, and I'll change my answer. And I say the same for Sorber, which again is not very bold because it's totally dependent on what team drafts him, what his role is going to be to start. And I love Sorber. I think he's a top 10, 11 kid in this draft. I still think he's going to be slowed down by this injury in the summer, and there's still some physical limitations that are going to hold him back, at least at first in his career. So I don't have the highest of expectations of how he plays as a rookie. My bold prediction or confident prediction on Sorber is that when he turns 30 years old, he will still be cashing an NBA check 11 years from now.
Love that. I'm going to say just wildly, we will have 2 Hoyas making all NBA rookie teams next year.
I'm glad over the course of 2 podcasts, we've already established that you are the homer. Somebody needed to be the homer, and I'm glad it's not me. I can be the one that complains.
Yeah, I think it's happening. I think a lot depends on where they go, but if given the right situation, those are 2 guys who can do it, and I'm expecting
I love it.
I'm expecting it.
If that does happen, I might get even more depressed that we didn't make the tournament last year.
That's true. That is true. I didn't think about it through that.
But I'll
lens.
also be insufferable on the internet about Ed Cooley's thing.
Yep. We can certainly be insufferable about that. All right. Well, we will be back at some point. We'll likely do a reaction. I think we'll be on Twitter Space on Thursday or Wednesday. I think it is talking
I think it
about
might be Thursday night with the
Thursday night. Sorry,
guys.
Yeah, Twitter Space Thursday night. You can get more information. Follow us at the Finger WAG on X. Obviously, follow us and check out the website. But we'll be back to talk more Hoya hoops. Jake, thanks again. Great insight as always.
Yep. I'm going to leave everybody with 2 statistics I found while doing some of this research.
Love it.
This one's from Sam Vecini, who I mentioned earlier. There are only 2 high major freshmen in the last 30 years to average 14 points, 8 rebounds, 2 assists, 2 blocks, and 1.5 steals. Those two freshmen were Chris Webber and Thomas Sorber.
Wow.
And then last year, there was only 2 high major players to average 17 points, 5 rebounds, 3 assists, shoot better than 30% from 3, and have a 3+ defensive box plus minus. Micah Peavy and Cooper Flagg. So with that, I want to say a major, major thank you to Thomas Sorber and Micah Peavy. Best of luck to them over the next 2 nights, and Hoya Saxa.
And I think that reads as NBA all rookies right there.
Yeah, let's go for it. Start the campaign now.